Hello, this PowerPoint is designed to help you with topic 17 on the higher level paper Africa in the Middle East for IB History. I'm going to look at the conflicts in Lebanon since 1945, the 1958 Civil War, the 1975 through the 1990 Civil War, and which also includes and incorporates the Israeli invasion of 1982. So in 1958, as William Oxenfeld says in his book, a mild civil war broke out. It's a multifaceted war and it's often referred to as the First Lebanese Civil War. We can put it into a context of growing pan-Arabism, and remember that confessional state in Lebanon, though, really delicate divide between the different religious groups that forms the government. The growth of pan-Arabism across the Middle Eastern region is especially appealing to Sunni Muslims, and there was a feeling growing perhaps in the Maronite Christian world that they didn't see themselves as part of that Arab unity, and they remember the Maronites were often looking across to Europe with their strong connections to the French. Also going on in this part of the world in 1958, the Iraqis have their revolution overthrowing a pro-Western government, and there's increasing concern about the influence of the UAR on Lebanon, and there's pressure from some Sunni groups to join in the UAR. Particularly, there's some feeling with the popular pan-Arabist Sunni Prime Minister Rashid Karami, and he will also become important later on in our story. So all of these kind of contexts are going on in 1958. The war breaks out really as a result of Chamoun's desire to try and become president for a second term. He wanted that second term along with his Christian supporters, but generally Muslims were opposed to that. That's really how the war kicks off. There's minor fighting all around Mount Lebanon, and Egypt and Syria will move in to help the rebels. A stalemate emerges in the war in 1958 when General Shihab, who is in charge of the Lebanese army, refuses to commit the Lebanese army to resolving this civil war. Whether he wanted the army not to get involved in internal politics, or perhaps it was an expression of the weakness of the Lebanese army. Remember, one of the challenges for Lebanon always will be that multi-confessional nature of the state and indeed the army. So most likely is Shihab just didn't want to try and split his multi-confessional army. Chamoun asks the USA for help, and in 1958 American Marines arrive in Beirut. The situation is calmed down reasonably quickly, but it does bring a Cold War aspect to the dispute. Resolving the 1958 war happens in a way that doesn't really resolve the key issue, which of course is the broken nature of the confessional state and that kind of uncertainty about the demographic position, particularly for the Christians. Shihab will become the president. Lebanon does not join the UAR. American troops withdraw fairly smoothly, and Shihab actually and his successor will work with policies to kind of align with Arab causes and begin to work with some reconciliation to the Muslims, which kind of gives the impression in the 1960s that things on the surface, certainly in Beirut, are returning to normal. There seems to be a period of calm. But remember that demographic growth, long-term poverty problems, particularly amongst Lebanon's Shia Muslims in the south, remains there. But it certainly seems in the 1960s that things are improving in Lebanon and that the country is moving forward and making solid economic and sort of social progress. But remember that demographic divide and the demographic issues are never going to be fully resolved during this time period. So that question always remains. In 1975 then, the second Lebanese Civil War breaks out, and I just want to set up with you some of the kind of background and environment domestically in Lebanon and also internationally which have an impact on the outbreak of the second Lebanese Civil War. As we've already said, the Christian community is being undermined by demographic changes, and the Muslim community is still dissatisfied with the lack of opportunities in power sharing. With the result of the 1967 and 1973 conflicts, there's an increase in the number of Palestinian refugees coming into Lebanon, and armed Palestinian groups in southern Lebanon in particular are using it as a base to launch attacks on Israel. There's retaliations throughout the early 1970s from the Israelis. Remember also that in 1970, Black September in Jordan, and King Hussein expels the PLO from Jordan. The base is now moved to southern Lebanon. So there's increasing tension within the state. Also, in terms of employee-employer relations and economic developments, in 1975 there's a fishermen's strike in Sidon. It's connected to the now ex-president Camille Chamoun, and his company is trying to consolidate and control the fishing at Sidon. A local politician, Maruf Saad, is heavily involved. He's a Sunni, he's an Arab socialist, a Nasserite, and locally very popular. He's assassinated, or he's shot in February and dies in March of 1975 from his injuries by a Lebanese army sniper. And it's beginning to cement an idea around the spring of 1975, which was certainly there earlier, that the sort of Christian rightists are the sort of the wealthy, powerful people, and the Muslims are the sort of moving into less satisfactory positions in Lebanese society. So this is also a kind of the backdrop to it domestically. Internationally, Lebanon remains neutral in the 1973 war, much to the disgust of many of its Arab neighbours and Palestinian refugees. In Syria, the Assad regime is now stabilised by 1975, and as one of the consequences of the 1973 war is the moving in of peace between Egypt and Israel. That agreement, of course, isn't signed till 1975, but 1979, excuse me. But in 1975, Egypt and Israel signed the interim agreement, which will lead to Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai Desert by 1982. There's a short video here from France 24 which gives you a quick overview of the Lebanese Civil War, and you can search for that separately on YouTube. In April 1975, the continued low-level clashes between Palestinians, Muslims and the Maronite Phalange militias come out really into the open. On the 13th of April 1975, there's two events. Early morning, shots are fired at a church in East Beirut, killing 4 people, 2 phalangists. It isn't clear who's responsible for that, but some of the sources have named sort of unidentified PLO gunmen. Later on in that morning, a busload of about 27 to 30 Palestinians are massacred by a Christian Phalange militia. And that's kind of like the division of the sides and the drawing of the lines in the Lebanese Civil War. One of the challenges is managing the Lebanese army during this time, and Lebanese army commanders, the senior officers were mostly Christian and the junior officers were mostly Muslim. And actually during the Civil War, the army kind of breaks apart really, and the people in the army divide according to their sectarian lines. Many of the Muslim soldiers sided with left-in Muslim groups or joined with Palestinian fighters. Many of the Christians joined rightist militias, but some chose to stay in their garrisons and not get involved in the conflict. In the spring of 1976, it's this intervention from Syria that brings the first phase of the Second Lebanese Civil War to a conclusion. The Christian government is facing defeat by 1976, and the Phalangists are not doing as well as they might have hoped against the PLO and the Muslim groups. And strangely enough, Syria intervenes to support the Maronite Christians. This seems very strange. It ends up with a bizarre situation with Christian militias supported by Israel and the Syrian army now working together against the Palestinians and Muslim Lebanese leftists. It kind of seems a strange move for Assad to make, but he's probably looking to enhance Syrian regional control and doesn't want a radical takeover of Lebanon that would expose Syria to trouble with Israel. Oxenfeld points out that many Syrians believe that Lebanon is an extension of Syria in many ways, and they're looking to kind of recreate a greater Syria, and perhaps they're hopeful there that this move will enable them to do that. Early 1976, as well as a massacre at Tel al-Zatar refugee camp. It's conducted by Christian forces, but the Syrians were certainly there, and whether they certainly supported the massacre. Whether they actually took part is again a matter for controversy. But with up to 1,500 refugees killed, there's heavy criticism of Syria from the Arab League. The PLO and left-wing militias in turn are attacking isolated communist villages. In 1976, though, an Arab League summit in Riyadh resolves some of the issues regarding this first phase of the civil war and will bring it to an end. Syria will maintain about 40,000 troops in Lebanon as part of an Arab deterrent force, and the PLO forces are forced to return to the south of Lebanon. But again, one of the key issues that caused the civil war the nature of the confessional state and the demographic changes in Lebanon since the National Pact of 1943 has not been resolved. By the late 1970s, you can see this map taken from Wikipedia, Lebanon is divided into sectarian strongholds. Emerging as a leader is Bashar Gemayel, and he is the son of a noted politician, and he will quite violently consolidate the rightist militias into a Lebanese, he calls them the Lebanese forces, and will begin to collect some support from Israel and the USA in the meantime. He's looking really to reassert Maronite authority in Lebanon and hopes that one of the ways that that can be done, the means in which it can be done, is an arrangement or an agreement with Israel. In the meantime, though, Israel invades southern Lebanon in June 1982, increasingly exasperated by the continued and sustained attacks from the PLO using South Lebanon as their base. They're hoping also to get Gemayel in as president of Lebanon, and very quickly the Israelis move north in Lebanon and quickly advance. By the 13th of June, they're at the Beirut-Damascus highway, which, as you can see there, marked on that map. Beirut gets divided by the Green Line, with the Muslims cut off in the west and the Christians in the east. By the 21st of August, the PLO has begun to evacuate West Beirut, but a multinational force is moving in. So this is the beginning of UN involvement in kind of maintaining some kind of, I hesitate to use the word peace, but some kind of arrangement in Lebanon. Gemayel is elected under Israeli supervision on the 23rd of August, but by the 14th of September 1982, he's been assassinated with Syrian support. In revenge for the assassination of Gemayel, Christian Phalange operatives kill up to 3,500 Palestinians and Lebanese Shiites in the Sabra neighborhood and nearby Shatila refugee camp. The Israeli military in the area did not prevent that massacre. In terms of the impact on the PLO, the invasion of Lebanon is pretty much a disaster for them. Syria is stirring up trouble supporting leaders that are opposed to Arafat. The PLO headquarters is forced to move out to Tunisia, and the PLO begins to lose its political independence. It begins to seek a rapprochement with Egypt. The Palestinian politics will now shift to West Bank and the Gaza. On the other side, domestically in Lebanon, Gemayel, the older brother and probably a more moderate character than Bashir, is elected president. He reaches out for a a peace settlement with Israel. It isn't popular at all, and opposition now shifts. The growth of opposition will shift to the Shia militias and to some extent the Druze, but remember the Druze are a much smaller group than Shia Muslims in Lebanon at this time. A couple of new groups form. Amal is formed first of all in the early 1970s and will be superseded by Hezbollah in the early 1980s. And by the mid-1980s, the Hezbollah is probably stronger than the Lebanese army, and the Shiites will also take over West Beirut at this time. Unable to reverse this decline in Christian influence and kind of increasingly concerned about the rise of the Shia in Lebanon, Gemayel demonstrates all his flexibility by asking the Syrians back into Lebanon they abrogate their arrangement with Israel, and Lebanon is now back under Syrian control. In 1989, a couple of key things that happen. Fighting has continued. There's plenty of Lebanese opposition to the Syrian involvement. And in 1987, popular president, you might remember him from the start, Rashid Karami, is assassinated. Gemayel's term in office ends, and there ensues some domestic political confusion in Lebanon. 1989, there's some severe fighting in Beirut, and one of the new prime ministers of Lebanon, really, despite the support from the army, Christians, Israel and Iraq, Syria is still really flexing its muscles and shows that in this situation there is an opportunity for a settlement. It's brokered and organised by the Saudis in 1989. The Taif Accord is signed. It acknowledges the ascendancy of the Shiites and that their growth, and kind of reverses some of the issues that the National Pact didn't address. There's an awful lot to take in here. If you want to pause on the last slide, there's some previous essay questions for you where Lebanon has featured heavily. Hope it helps with your review. Thanks for watching.